Hey, I'm Maya. I'm just an ordinary woman, or at least that's what I thought for most of my life. I grew up thinking I knew my family, thinking I understood who I was and where I came from. But sometimes the truth has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it, turning your whole world upside down. This is my story, a story about family betrayal and the moment when the people you trust the most become the ones who break you. I'm telling you this not because I want sympathy, but because maybe somewhere in my journey you'll find a piece of your own. It all started on a late afternoon, a day like any other, but it changed everything. I was supposed to be upstairs finishing some work, typical boring stuff, when I heard them. Voices, quiet, tense, and hurried. It was my parents, but this wasn't the usual small talk or friendly banter. This was something darker. If this gets out, it'll ruin everything, my dad said, his voice low but tight with fear. My mum's reply was soft, almost pleading. We can't keep living this lie. It's tearing us apart. I froze. I shouldn't have been listening, but my feet felt glued to the floor. That moment was the first crack in the perfect image I'd held of my family. Everything I thought I knew suddenly felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Over the next few days, I couldn't get those words out of my head. The smiles at dinner were forced. Conversations were stilted, and the silence between us grew louder and more suffocating. One night, curiosity, or maybe desperation, pushed me to check my dad's study. I wasn't proud of snooping, but I had to know the truth. That's when I found the folder. Inside were financial records, secret accounts, and documents that didn't add up. It was clear the foundation of my family's life was built on lies. I realized I had a choice: live in denial or face the storm. I chose the storm. The morning sun filtered weakly through the heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the cold wooden floor of the house I had once called home. I woke with a pounding headache and a mind restless with questions that had no easy answers. The folder I had found the night before sat heavy in my thoughts, like an anchor dragging me down into a sea of secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to face. For years I had built a wall between myself and the truths of my family. I convinced myself that ignorance was a shield, that not knowing the darkness beneath the surface was better than tearing the fabric of my life apart. But that night the wall had crumbled, and now I stood exposed, facing the raw and jagged edges of a reality I could no longer deny. I dressed quickly, the chill of the morning air sinking into my bones. The house felt unfamiliar, every creak and groan reminding me that I was no longer the child who had once played in these halls. I had returned, but everything had changed. The laughter was gone. The warmth was gone. Even the smell of the house, a mix of old wood fading perfume, and memories had turned stale and heavy. I made my way down the stairs, careful not to disturb the silence. The kitchen was empty, the windows fogged over from the morning dew. The news from the town had been sparse, a few whispered condolences from neighbours, but no real answers. My mother's absence was an ache in the house, an invisible weight that pressed on everything. I found a cup and poured myself some coffee, the bitterness matching the storm brewing inside me. My eyes wandered to the photo on the fridge, a picture of my parents from happier times, smiling young, full of hope. I touched the edge of the frame, feeling the cold glass beneath my fingers, wishing I could reach back in time and change everything. The questions circled endlessly. Why did my father disappear? What was the secret my mother kept hidden all these years? What had they been running from? Determined to find answers, I retreated to my father's study, the one room I had always been told to stay away from as a child. Now that forbidden space held the key to everything. The room was thick with dust and shadows. Books lined the shelves, their spines cracked and faded. On the desk, a single lamp cast a pool of light over scattered papers and an open leather-bound journal. I hesitated, then carefully opened it, revealing pages filled with neat, meticulous handwriting. It was my father's journal. As I read through the entries, a picture began to emerge. A man tormented by secrets, caught in a web of lies and deceit. His words spoke of business deals gone wrong, threats from unseen enemies, and a desperate hope to protect his family from the darkness closing in around them. One entry stood out: "I fear what I've become. Every choice I make seems to pull us further into the abyss. But if I don't hold on, everything will be lost. For them, for my family, I must keep going, no matter the cost." The weight of those words settled over me like a heavy fog. My father's disappearance was not an accident or a random choice. It was a desperate attempt to shield us from a world I had only just begun to understand. My mind reeled. The idyllic childhood I remembered was nothing more than a fragile facade. Beneath it lay fractures that threatened to tear everything apart. Suddenly, a knock at the door startled me. I hastily closed the journal and turned to see Sheriff Jameson standing in the doorway, his face grave. "I thought you might be here," he said quietly. "Sheriff." I breathed relief and apprehension mingling in my voice. "What do you know about my father?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "More than you probably want to hear," he said, sitting down heavily in the worn armchair. "This isn't just about a man walking away. There's more, much more." For hours he told me about the investigations, the secrets buried beneath Glenfield's quiet streets, and the shadowy figures that lurked just beyond the surface. He warned me of dangers I had never imagined and told me that the truth, once uncovered, could come at a steep price. But for the first time I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe with the sheriff's help I could finally piece together the puzzle. Maybe I could uncover the truth, not just about my father, but about myself and the family I thought I knew. The sheriff's words echoed in my mind long after he left. Glenfield was not the quiet, peaceful town I had remembered. It was a place haunted by secrets, by people desperate to keep the past buried. And I was now standing right in the middle of it. That night I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying every word Jameson had said. He mentioned old feuds, hidden crimes, and whispers of a darkness that had seeped into the town's foundations long ago. I realized my family wasn't just tangled in personal secrets, there were bigger forces at play. Determined not to be swept away by fear, I decided to start with the basics, tracing my father's last known steps. The next morning I grabbed my coat and drove to the local library. I spent hours digging through old newspapers, police reports, and town records looking for anything that might shed light on my father's disappearance. Each article seemed to point to an unsolved mystery, a thread left dangling. One faded clipping caught my eye. "Local businessman disappears under suspicious circumstances." The man in the photo was my father. The report detailed how he vanished without a trace 2 decades ago. No ransom notes, no leads, just silence. But buried within the report was a hint of something more. Rumours of illegal dealings, dangerous liaisons, and a growing list of enemies. I felt a chill. The idyllic story I had been told about my father protecting us was unravelling fast. It seemed he had been living a double life, and the consequences of that life had caught up to him, to all of us. That afternoon I returned to the house and pored over more of the documents in the box my mother left behind. Old letters between my parents revealed a desperate attempt to keep us safe, coded warnings, veiled threats and pleas for secrecy. My mother had known more than she ever told me, had been part of the silent battle to shield me from the storm. But those efforts had failed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a decision. I couldn't run from the truth anymore. I had to face whatever waited for me, no matter how painful. For my family, for my own peace of mind, I needed to uncover the whole story. I was no longer a bystander. I was ready to be the one to break the silence. The following days blurred into a mix of restless nights and determined mornings. I became consumed by the quest for truth, scouring every corner of Glenfield, asking cautious questions, piecing together fragments from the past. Every new detail added depth to the portrait of my father, but also painted a darker, more complicated image than I'd ever imagined. One afternoon I found myself standing outside an old abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. Sheriff Jameson had mentioned it in passing, a place tied to some of the whispers about my father's secret dealings. The paint was peeling off the walls, windows boarded up, and vines had crept along the sides like nature's attempt to erase it. I hesitated at the gate, heart pounding. What would I find inside? Would answers bring relief or only more questions? With a deep breath, I pushed the gate open. It creaked loudly, breaking the eerie silence. Inside, the air was thick with dust and neglect. My footsteps echoed as I wandered through the empty rooms. Old crates, faded markings on the walls, signs of a life long abandoned, yet still charged with secrets. Then, in a corner beneath a broken window, I saw it, a weathered metal box, locked, but rusty. I pried it open with trembling hands. Inside were documents, photographs, and notebooks, remnants of a life I'd never known. Flipping through the pages, I found correspondence that spoke of deals, threats, and a web of people pulling strings from the shadows. Names I recognized from the town, prominent figures, businessmen, even some of my family's closest allies. Suddenly, the weight of it all crashed down on me. My father's disappearance wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was part of something much bigger, a tangled mess of lies, power plays, and danger that had engulfed Glenfield itself. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about facing a present still haunted by those same forces. And the deeper I dug, the more I understood that my own life might be at risk. That night, back in the cold silence of my childhood home, I made a promise to myself I would not let fear silence me. I would confront the darkness head-on no matter what it cost. Because some truths can't stay buried forever. The days following my discovery at the warehouse were a whirlwind. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The documents I'd found painted a picture so dark and tangled it was hard to believe it was real. It was as if my father had been living a double life, a life so secret and dangerous that even those closest to him were kept in the dark. I spent hours reading through every letter, every note, trying to make sense of names and dates, coded language, and veiled threats. The network he'd been involved in stretched far beyond Glenfield. Powerful people, corrupt officials, shadowy figures who controlled more than just businesses, they controlled lives. One thing was clear, my father's disappearance had been planned. It wasn't a desperate escape or a random tragedy. It was a carefully orchestrated vanishing act designed to protect something or someone. But what? The more I dug, the more I realized the answers weren't going to come easy. I needed help. Someone who knew the town, who understood the silent battles being fought behind closed doors. Someone like Sheriff Jameson. I called him and arranged to meet at a small cafe on the edge of town. The place smelled of strong coffee and old books, a stark contrast to the heaviness I carried. He arrived minutes later, his face etched with the same weariness I felt. We sat down in a quiet corner and I laid out everything I'd found. Jameson listened carefully, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he sighed. "You've uncovered what most people here have been too afraid to face." I looked at him, searching for answers. Why did no one tell me? Why did my family keep me in the dark? He shook his head. Fear, loyalty, maybe even love twisted in the wrong way. But the truth was too dangerous. The people involved have a way of making sure secrets stay buried. I swallowed hard. So, what do I do now? Jameson's eyes were steady. You keep going, but you have to be careful. They're watching, and if they think you're a threat, they won't hesitate. I felt a chill. This wasn't just about uncovering the past anymore, it was about survival. But I was ready. After my meeting with Sheriff Jameson, I felt a mixture of determination and dread swirling inside me. The warnings were clear. I was stepping into a dangerous game, one where the stakes were far higher than I had imagined. Returning to the house that evening, I locked the door behind me and sat alone in the dim light of the living room. The house felt colder than ever, every creak echoing like a reminder that I was no longer safe. I pulled out the folder again, determined to uncover more clues, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Jameson's words, "They're watching." Suddenly the sound of footsteps outside the window made me freeze. I moved cautiously to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer out. Nothing. Just the shadows of trees swaying in the wind. My heart pounded. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been there, watching me. I knew then I couldn't do this alone anymore. I needed allies, people I could trust, people willing to stand with me against the darkness threatening to swallow everything. The next morning I reached out to Maggie, my oldest friend, the one person in Glenfield I trusted without question. We met at the town's small cafe, the kind of place where everyone knew your business, but Maggie had always been my safe harbour. I told her everything, the secrets, the hidden documents, the strange shadows following me at night. She listened, her eyes wide but steady, never doubting me for a second. "You're not alone, Maya," she said firmly. "We'll figure this out together." Her words were a balm to my frazzled nerves, but the danger was real and close. Over the next few days, Maggie helped me gather evidence, made calls to people who might know more, and even stayed with me at night, when I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One evening, as we reviewed some of the papers, my phone buzzed an anonymous text, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." My hands shook, the threat was clear, but I couldn't stop now. With Maggie by my side and Sheriff Jameson's reluctant support, I realised the fight for the truth was just beginning. The past was dark and dangerous, but I was ready to face it head-on, no matter what. The warning text was like a cold slap across my face. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." My heart raced, but deep down, I already knew I wasn't going to stop. Not now, not ever. Maggie's face was pale when I showed her the message. "They're watching Maya, and they're serious." I nodded, my jaw tight. I felt it for days, like eyes burning holes through the windows, shadows lurking just beyond the light. That night, I barely slept. Every noise, the creak of the old house, settling the rustle of leaves outside, made me jump. I kept the doors locked and the blinds drawn, but the feeling of being hunted didn't fade. The next morning, I met with Sheriff Jameson again. His face was grave, the weight of what he was about to say pressing down on the room. "We're dealing with people who don't want this uncovered," he warned. "They have influence in town, beyond town. This isn't just a family secret anymore. It's a dangerous game." I swallowed hard, but met his gaze. "I don't care how dangerous it is. I have to know the truth." Jameson sighed. "I'll do what I can to protect you, but you have to be careful who you trust. Even people close to you might be hiding something." The thought sent a chill down my spine. Who could I trust anymore? Determined, I doubled down on my investigation. I started reaching out to people my father had known, old friends, former business partners, hoping to find someone willing to talk. One evening, after a long day of searching, I found a faded photograph tucked inside one of the notebooks. It was of my father, smiling beside a man I didn't recognize, someone with a cold, calculating look. I had no idea who he was, but somehow I knew this man was a key to unlocking the past. The next step was clear: find out who he was and what role he played in the web my father had been entangled in. But with every answer, the danger seemed to grow. The shadows lengthened and the threats became more direct. I wasn't just uncovering the past, I was waking a sleeping beast. The deeper I delved into my father's past, the more tangled the web became. The man beside him in the photograph, a stranger with piercing eyes, seemed to haunt every corner of the story I was uncovering. I needed answers, but every step forward felt like walking on a razor's edge. One rainy afternoon, Maggie and I found ourselves sitting in the dim light of a quiet diner, papers and photos spread out before us. The rain tapped steadily against the window, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. "I checked every record I could find," Maggie said, frustration evident in her voice. "There's no direct connection to that guy, at least nothing official. But I did hear whispers, things people don't say out loud. They call him the broker, a fixer, someone who handles problems behind the scenes." I felt a chill. "So he's the one pulling the strings," probably, Maggie said. "If your father was involved with him, it means the stakes were higher than you thought. And that man doesn't like loose ends." Her words echoed what Sheriff Jameson had warned me: I was dealing with dangerous people, but I had no choice. The truth was a fire I couldn't extinguish. Later that night, alone in my room, I stared at the photo again. The faces stared back, frozen in time, but to me they represented a living nightmare. How much had my father known? How deep had he sunk into darkness? I thought about my mother, about the silence she'd kept, about the distance between us, that had only grown wider with time. Had she known more than she let on? Had she been trapped too? The questions overwhelmed me. The next day I confronted my brother Derek. I found him in the old family garage, the place where we had spent so many childhood afternoons. He was alone, staring at a rusted motorcycle, lost in thought. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't look up. About what? About everything. About Dad, about the family, about what's really going on. He finally met my gaze, eyes tired but wary. "You don't want to go down this path, Maya." "Maybe I don't have a choice anymore," I replied. "The truth is out there, Derek, and we either face it together or let it destroy us." He sighed deeply. "I'm scared, not of the truth, of what it will do to us." "Me too," I admitted, "but running away won't fix anything." For the first time in years, Derek and I really talked about the shadows lurking behind our family's legacy. We shared fears, regrets, and painful memories. And though the wounds were fresh, the conversation was a step towards something neither of us knew we needed: honesty. But even as we made tentative plans to dig deeper, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, that the shadows were closing in, and this time they weren't just whispers in the dark. From the moment Derek and I started digging together, everything escalated faster than I could have imagined. The fragile threads holding our family's secrets began to fray, unraveling before our eyes, and with every revelation came a new wave of danger. One afternoon I received an anonymous message, a simple warning, but it shook me to my core. "Stop digging or you'll be the next to disappear." The words hung in the air like a dark omen, confirming that those watching us were no longer content to remain in the shadows. I showed the message to Derek. His face went pale, but his resolve hardened. "We can't back down now. If they think fear will stop us, they're wrong." We began to realize how deep the conspiracy went, friends. We thought we could trust family, acquaintances, even some officials, all tangled in a web of silence and intimidation. It was clear the more we uncovered, the more we threatened a powerful network determined to protect itself at any cost. Our nights grew restless. Strange noises outside the house, unfamiliar cars lingering at the end of the street, and the creeping feeling that we were no longer alone. I found myself checking locks multiple times, jumping at every unexpected sound. One evening, after hours poring over documents, Derek had discovered the power suddenly cut out. Darkness swallowed the room. My heart raced as I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. "Who's there?" I whispered, clutching Derek's arm. No answer, just the soft echo of footsteps fading away. That night, I realized the truth was no longer just a battle of uncovering facts, it was a fight for survival. But despite the fear, something inside me refused to break. Every secret uncovered was a step closer to justice, no matter the cost. Together, Derek and I made a silent pact we would see this through no matter what lay ahead. The tension was suffocating, like a storm hanging over us, threatening to break at any moment. Every day brought a new challenge, a new threat, and the walls I thought would protect me felt like they were closing in. Derek and I were growing closer, united by the burden we carried, but the strain was visible. Nights filled with whispered plans and restless sleep days, spent dodging questions and suspicious glances from neighbours and even old friends. Trust was a fragile thing now, and sometimes even between us, I felt it slipping. One evening, I received a call that shook me to my core. The voice on the other end was disguised cold and filled with warning. "You're digging too deep. Walk away now or you'll regret everything." I hung up, my hands trembling. I stared at the phone, heart pounding. The threat was no longer hidden. It was personal. I told Derek immediately. "We're past the point of no return," he said grimly. "But we have to be smart. If they want us silenced, they'll come prepared." That night, the house felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of footsteps outside my window. The weight of fear was almost unbearable. But alongside it grew something else: determination. I realized that fear could only control me if I let it. The next day, Derek and I decided to confront the situation head on. We met with Sheriff Jameson, whose presence was a small beacon of hope in this dark mess. "Your safety is my priority," he told us. "But you have to cooperate fully. There's more at stake here than just your family." We agreed to be cautious, but resolute. Together we planned our next moves, gathering evidence, securing allies, preparing for the battle that lay ahead. Because sometimes to find the light, you have to step into the darkness. The night felt heavier than ever as Derek and I moved cautiously through the dimly lit streets of Glenfield. Our meeting with Sheriff Jameson had given us a sliver of hope, but the truth was clear. The shadows surrounding my family were darker and more dangerous than I'd feared. We had planned to meet with a former associate of my father, someone who might hold the key to unravelling the deeper layers of this tangled web. His name was Harris, a man known for keeping secrets and surviving the chaos that often came with them. If anyone could help, it was him. The warehouse where we agreed to meet was far from the town centre, an old forgotten place swallowed by weeds and neglect. The air was thick with moisture and the scent of rusted metal. Every step echoed ominously in the cavernous space. When Harris finally appeared, he was a shadow of the man I'd imagined older worn, but with eyes that still held sharp intelligence. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, voice rough. "These aren't games you want to play, Maya." I met his gaze steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. "I need to know the truth." He hesitated, then nodded. "Your father got involved with forces beyond his control. Powerful people who don't forgive mistakes. He tried to protect you, but it cost him everything." He pulled out a folder filled with documents, contracts, letters, coded messages. Each one a piece of the puzzle, but also a reminder of how deep the danger ran. As we spoke, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. Harris froze eyes, darting to the shadows. "They're coming," he whispered. "We don't have much time." Derek and I exchanged a glance. The moment we'd feared was arriving. We had to escape, and fast. The chase through the dark alleys was a blur of adrenaline and desperation. Heart-pounding, breath ragged. I realized that the fight for the truth was no longer just about uncovering secrets. It was about survival. When we finally lost them, safe for the moment, I understood that every step deeper into the past risked dragging us further into the shadows. But I wasn't turning back. Not now. The adrenaline from the chase hadn't worn off. My hands were still shaking when we finally found refuge in an old abandoned church on the outskirts of town. The heavy wooden doors creaked shut behind us, sealing out the night and the danger lurking just beyond. I sank down onto a worn pew, my chest heaving as Derek leaned against the wall, eyes dark and thoughtful. "We're in deeper than I thought," he said quietly. "This isn't just about the past anymore. It's about power control. And those people, they won't stop until we do." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle like a stone in my stomach. The truth we were chasing was a double-edged sword. It promised freedom, but demanded a price, one that might cost us everything. Over the next few days, the danger escalated. Strange cars appeared near the house. Phone calls with no voice on the other end. Unmarked envelopes filled with threats and warnings. It was clear someone wanted us silenced. But with every threat, my resolve hardened. I knew that exposing the truth about my father and the dark forces surrounding him meant risking my safety, my family's reputation, and maybe even my life. But I couldn't turn back. That night, I found myself staring at the photo of my father and the mysterious man, the broker, wondering what deal had sealed his fate. I realized then that the truth wasn't just a story to tell. It was a battle to fight, and I was ready to fight no matter the cost. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than I had imagined. Every secret uncovered revealed another layer of deception, betrayal, and power struggles that went far beyond my family. It wasn't just about my father's disappearance anymore. It was about the tangled web of alliances, threats and crimes that had ruled Glenfield in silence for decades. The pressure was unbearable. Every move I made was shadowed by suspicion, every conversation tinged with danger. One evening, as I sat alone in the dim glow of the study lamp, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Tonight, the truth awaits, be ready." My heart raced. Was this a trap, or a chance to finally confront the people behind it all? With Derek and Sheriff Jameson by my side, I headed toward the address they gave me, an old manor on the outskirts of town, shrouded in fog and mystery. The confrontation was inevitable. Inside, voices whispered in the dark, figures moving in shadows. The air was thick with tension as the past and present collided in a dramatic showdown. I faced those who had hidden the truth, those who had betrayed us all. And I realised that sometimes the hardest battles are fought not just with words or evidence, but with courage. That night marked the beginning of a reckoning for my family, for Glenfield, and for me. No matter what came next, I knew one thing: the truth would set us free. The air felt different that morning, lighter, almost electric. After the storm of revelations and confrontations, the world around me seemed to breathe a tentative sigh of relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could see a horizon beyond the shadows that had loomed so long over my life. The reckoning had come harsh and unforgiving, but necessary. The secrets that had suffocated my family were out in the open, and while the scars they left were deep, there was also room for healing. I stood by the window of my childhood home, now transformed by the morning sun's golden light. The house, once a symbol of silence and fear, felt alive. Again, a place where stories could be told honestly, and where the past no longer dictated the future. Derek joined me quietly, his presence a steady reassurance. "We made it through," he said softly, breaking the silence. "We did," I replied, feeling the weight of those words, "but this is just the beginning. There's a lot to rebuild trust, family, even ourselves." The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time it was mine to choose. I wasn't just the daughter of a man who disappeared into darkness. I was Maya, a survivor, a seeker of truth, and a woman ready to write her own story. And as the new dawn rose over Glenfield, I knew that no matter what challenges awaited, I would face them head on. Because sometimes the brightest light comes after the darkest night.